I should have mentioned it on the last slide, but you shouldn't sit down and try to memorize the list of conclusion indicator words. That is, as you start working through examples, keep the slides open with the indicator words on them, and use them as you work your way through it. It's going to be the easiest way for you to remember. If you try to sit down there and memorize these in the abstract, it really is going to be much more difficult than it has to be. But now let us take a look at the concrete steps, because I want to suggest a few concrete steps for identifying conclusions. And the first thing that you need to do in trying to identify the conclusion is ask yourself, what is the main point of the passage? What is the point of the passage? What is it trying to get you at? That might not give you the conclusion, but it's going to point you in the direction about what the conclusion is. You have to sit down and think about it. So if somebody were to ask you a question, you just read this passage, what's the main point? What would you tell them? Now, bear in mind that conclusions don't have to be controversial claims, and they can be about any kind of topic. It doesn't have to be a philosophy. It doesn't have to be about academic stuff. It could be about fashion. It could be about cars. It could be about sports. It could be about music. And look for conclusion indicator words. Sometimes you will not find them there. And keep these 3 rules in mind as you start working through the problem, because I think these are going to be pretty critical ones. And then if you think you found the conclusion, but there's no conclusion indicator, try to insert a conclusion indicator, like therefore, and see if the passage still reads smoothly. And it should still read smoothly, as an argument in favor of that claim that you're making as a passage. Now, these are really the 4 key issues in identifying a conclusion. But before we go, I do want to mention a couple of more. Don't spend a lot of time on them. In fact, I just want you to hear them now, and we'll be coming back to them later on in the course. And keep in mind, this is a warning when you're dealing with more complicated arguments, that sometimes conclusions aren't explicitly stated. That is, they're implied. They're not stated in there. I think when we looked at the example at the beginning of the letter to the editor arguing against the people who opposed the Supreme Court's decision to legalize or to allow the burning of the American flag, I think in that case there might have been a conclusion that was not explicitly stated, namely that the Supreme Court's decision was a good decision. And the second part of this is that sometimes conclusions are stated in an unclear way, imprecise, or even a misleading way. Sometimes the guy who's presenting the argument might even be confused about it. You should try to help them out. But this is when we really keep that in mind when we get to more complicated arguments. And here's another one regarding, really the future. Because at the beginning I'm going to try to have you stick to shorter passages because it's easier to figure out the structure of the argument in those. But longer passages oftentimes contain multiple arguments. And sometimes it can be useful to outline the structure, that is, make an outline of the entire passage. That way, if you think there are multiple conclusions being argued for, you'll be able to line them up to what's being said. But keep those 5 and 6, keep those in mind for the future. Just remember the key ones. What's the main point of the passage? It doesn't have to be a controversial point. See if there are conclusion indicators, and if there aren't, try to put one in and see if you can get to and see if the passage reads smoothly as an argument.